Joe Sullivan, a piano player whose career began in Chicago in the tough 20s, was a boyhood hero of mine and remains so, though I'm no longer a boy. There was a time when his records late in his life were not available, and I wrote what might have been a liner note for a record had there been one available. This is called The Thing About Joe Sullivan. The pianist Joe Sullivan, jamming sound against idea, hard as it can go, florid and dangerous, slams at the beat or hovers drumming along its spikes. In his time, almost the only one of them to ignore the chance of easing down, walking it leisurely, he'll strut with gambling shapes underpinning by James P., amble and stride over gulfs of his own leaving, perilously toppling octaves down to where the chords grow fat again, and ride hard-edged, most lucidly voiced and in good inversions, even when the piano seems at risk of being hammered the next second into scrap. For all that, he won't swing like all the others, disregards mere continuity, the snake-charming business, the masturbator's rhythm under the long variations. Sullivan can gut a sequence in one chorus, approach, development, climax, discard, and sound magnanimous. The mannerism of intensity often with him seems true. Too much to be said, the mood pressing in right at the start, then running among stock forms that could play themselves, and moving there with such quickness of intellect that shapes floor and fuse, altering without much sign, concentration so wrapped up in thoroughness it can sound bluff, bustling, just big-handed stuff, belied by what drives him in to make rigid, display, shout and abscond, rather than just let it come, let it go. And that thing is his mood, a feeling violent and ordinary that runs in among standard forms so wrapped up in clarity that fingers following is his, through figures that sound obvious. Find corners everywhere, marks of invention, wakefulness, the rapid and perverse tracks that ordinary feelings make when they get driven hard enough against time. This is a poem written in 1957 about events in 1940, the entertainment of war. I saw the garden where my aunt had died, and her 2 children and a woman from next door. It was like a burst pod filled with clay. A mile away in the night, I had heard the bombs sing and then burst themselves between cramped houses, with bright soft flashes and sounds like banging doors. The last of them crushed the 4 bodies into the ground, scattered the shelter, and blasted my uncle's corpse over the housetop and into the street beyond. Now the garden lay stripped and stale, the iron shelter spread out its separate petals around a smooth clay saucer, small and so tidy it seemed nobody had ever been there. When I saw it, the house was blown clean by blast and care. Relations had already torn out the new fireplaces. My cousin's pencils lasted me several years. And in his office notepad that was given me, I found solemn drawings in crayon of blondes without dresses. In his lifetime I'd not known him well. Those were the things I noticed at 10 years of age. Those and the 4 hearses outside our house, the chocolate cakes, and my classmates' half-shocked envy. But my grandfather went home from the mortuary, and for 5 years tried to share the noises in his skull. Then he walked out and lay under a furze bush to die. When my father came home from identifying the daughter, he asked us to remind him of her mouth. We tried. He said, "I think it was the one." These were marginal people I'd met only rarely, and the end of the whole household meant that no grief was seen, Never have people seemed so absent from their own deaths. This bloody episode of 4 whom I could understand better dead gave me something I needed to keep the long story moving. I had no pain of it, can find no scar even now. But had my belief in the fiction not been thus buoyed up, I might, in the sigh and strike of the next night's bombs, have realised a little what they meant, and for the first time been afraid. The nation. The national day had dawned. Everywhere the national tree was opening its blossoms to the sun's first rays, and from all quarters, young and old in national costume, were making their way to the original national building, where the national standard already fluttered against the sky. Some breakfasted on the national dish as they walked, frequently pausing to greet acquaintances with a heartfelt exchange of the national gesture. Many were leading the national animal. Others carried it in their arms. The national bird flew overhead, and on every side could be heard the keen strains of the national anthem, played on the national instrument. Where enough were gathered together, national feeling ran high, and concerted cries of "Death to the national foe" were raised. The national weapon was brandished. Though festivities were constrained by the size of the national debt, the national sport was vigorously played all day, and the national drink drunk. And from midday till late in the evening, there arose continually from the rear of the national prison the sounds of the national method of execution, dealing out rapid justice to those who had given way, on this day of all days, to the national vice. Text for a film. This was a film by Tom Pickard, chiefly about what we call Birmingham River, which is about the singular lack of visible water in Birmingham. Talking to cameras. Birmingham's what I think with. It's not made for that sort of job, but it's what they gave me. As a means of thinking, it's a Brummagem screwdriver. What that is a medium-weight claw hammer, or something of the sort, employed to drive a tapered wood screw home, as if it were a nail. It's done for lack of a nail, a screwdriver, a drill, a bradawl, or the will to go looking. The results come out mixed. It blunts the screw point, strains the shank, bashes the head slot flat, but forced straight into the splitting wood, it won't wind loose, and it can't be twisted back out, even if there's enough slot left for the bit. It's instant and it's obstinate, and it's nobody else's future. The screw dies in the attempt. But you can be sure, if it's Birmingham, that everything will be altered by the time you'd have wanted it again. This isn't Yorkshire or Paris. Birmingham River. Where's Birmingham River? Sunk. Which river was it? 2, more or less. History. We're on our tribal ground. When they moved in from the Trent, the first English entered the holdings and the bodies of the people who called the waters that kept them alive Tame, the dark river. These English spread their works southward, then westward, then all ways for 30-odd miles, up to the damp tips of the 30-odd weak headwaters of the Tame. By all of the Tame they settled and sat, named themselves after it Tom Satan, and back down at Tamworth, where the river almost began to amount to something, the Mercian kings kept their state. Dark, because there's hardly a still expanse of it wide enough to catch the sky, the dark river mothered the black country, and all but vanished underneath it, seeping out from the low hills by Dudley, by Upper Cornwall, by Sedgley, by Wolverhampton, by Bloxwich, dropping morosely without a shelf or a race or a dip, no more than a few feet every mile, fattened a little from mean streams that join at Tipton, Bilston, Willenhall, Darlaston, Oldbury, Wensbury. From Bescot she oozes a border round Handsworth, where I was born, snakes through the flat meadows that turned into Perry Bar, passes through Witton, heading for the city but never getting there. A couple of miles out, she catches the timeless, suspended scent of Nechells and Saltley, coal gas, sewage, smoke. Turns and makes off for Tamworth, caught on the right shoulder by the wash that's run under Birmingham. A slow, petty river with no memory of an ancient name, a river called Ray, meaning river, and misspelt at that. Before they merge, they're both steered straight in channels that force them clear of the gasworks, and the Tame gets marched out of town in the policed calm that hangs under the long legs of the M6. These living rivers turgidly watered the fields, gave drink, drove low-powered mills, shoved the Soho works into motion, collected waste and foul waters, gave way to steam, collected sewage, factory poisons, gave way to clean Welsh water, kept on collecting typhoid, sank out of sight under streets, highways, the back walls of workshops, collected metals, chemicals, aquicide, ceased to draw lines that weren't cancelled or unwanted, became drains with no part in anybody's plan. For realism. For realism, the sight of Lucas's lamp factory on a summer night, a shift coming off about 9, pale light dispersing, runnels of people chased by pavements drying off quickly after them, away among the wrinkled brown houses where there are cracks for them to go. Sometimes, at the corner of Farm and Wheeler Streets, standing in that stained, half-deserted place, pale light for staring up 4 floors high through the blind window walls of a hall of engines, shady humps left alone, no lights on in there except the sky. There presses in, and not as conscience, what concentrates down in the warm hollow. Plenty of life there still. The food shops open late and people going about constantly, but not far. There's a man in a blue suit facing into a corner, struggling to keep his shoes dry. Women step talking over the stream, and when the men going by call out, he answers. Above dignity, a new precinct comes over the scraped hill. Flats on the ridge get the last light. Down Wheeler Street, the lamp's already gone. The windows have lake stretches of silver, gashed out of tea-green shadows, the after images of brickwork. A conscience builds late on the ridge. A realism tries to record before they're gone what silver filth these drains have run. It is writing. Because it could do it well, the poem wants to glorify suffering. I mistrust it. I mistrust the poem in its hour of success, a thing capable of being tempted by ethics into the wonderful. Got it?
Yeah, that was
Okay.
good.
That's perfect.
That's a lovely poem.
It is.
No problem.
I really like that.